Hopefully others will be able to join us shortly. Welcome. We are thrilled to have you join us today as we discuss the cost of decarbonizing single-family homes. My name is Alara Moju, and I'm an energy sustainability specialist with the Office of Sustainability for San Mateo County, and I'll be moderating today's event. Next slide, please. So before we get started, I wanted to highlight some Zoom functions. Please use the Q&A feature to share your thoughts, concerns, and your questions with the panelists. Clarifying questions will be answered after each section. Discussion questions will be answered during the Q&A at the end of the presentation. So please bear with us if you have anything pressing you would like to discuss. I'll start by giving you some background about this cost study project. Knowing that climate action plans rely heavily on decarbonizing existing buildings to meet greenhouse gas reduction goals, the Office of Sustainability wanted to understand the challenges and opportunities. In the fall of 2020, the Office of Sustainability's Climate Protection Program Manager led a regional systems mapping effort, specifically designed to better understand how to address existing single-family homes. One of the outcomes from this project was an understanding that there's a need for home electrification plans. This led Kim Springer, now with the City County Association of Governments of San Mateo County, to suggest doing this cost study of 10 homes to better understand the actual costs. BayREN provided the funding for both efforts. Next slide, please. Thank you. In the spring of 2021, the county put out an RFQ to find consultants to help us understand the costs of decarbonizing single-family homes at scale. Tom Cabot and Josie Gaylord were selected to lead us on this endeavor. Today, we will be sharing the outcomes from our project that looked at decarbonizing 10 homes in different parts of San Mateo County, in addition to the insights that Tom and Josie have gained from doing this project. I would now like to invite Tom and Josie to take over. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Alero. So I'm Josie Gaylord. I'll be kicking things off, and Tom will jump in our third section, which is all about economics. So here's our agenda for today. We'll briefly review the study goals, jump into electrification plans and the value of them. We'll talk a little bit about working with home contractors and what we learned. Tom will then take over and walk us through some homeowner economics. And we'll finish with some thoughts on policies that would support rapid building electrification. And finally, at the end, and this can spill over past our 2-hour time together, we want to open the forum up for a more free-flowing discussion and feedback. There will be some breaks in between each section for like 2-minute breaks for clarifying questions, but keep those very brief, please. Okay, so study goals. The goals of the project were to learn about costs and strategies for decarbonizing existing homes in San Mateo County. We wanted to learn, so what does it actually cost to decarbonize a home? Tom and I had done our own homes and we helped a few people, but looking across different single-family home types, and these are all single-family homes in San Mateo County, we wanted to get sort of a broader data set, or the county wanted to get a broader data set. So one of the questions we were curious about, does a plan help homeowners in our own electrification projects? We felt like a plan was really helpful. And then what can we learn from this process of assisting homeowners that might help others as we do this, look forward to a time when everyone's going to have to fully electrify their home. Our process started with the county issuing a survey and opening that up to citizens all across the county. 78 homeowners applied and 10 were selected. We'll go over how the criteria we use for selecting homeowners, but we were trying to get a broad kind of data set. So we were looking across multiple variables to try to get diversity. The next step was Tom and I had 45-minute calls with each homeowner to just introduce ourselves and walk them through the process, and ask some initial questions about their homes. The next step was to do site visits where we actually went to each home and we spent 2 hours on site, gathering different dimensions, looking at sites for different pieces of equipment, taking lots of photos, again, kind of asking homeowners different questions about their satisfaction with different systems in their homes and what they were looking for. Next, we created drawings and detailed plans for each home that included equipment types, sizing, different locations and controls that might be required for each home. We did very detailed heat loss calculations per the Manual J, which is the HVAC industry's sort of gold standard for assessing how much, how large a heating system you need for a home. We also learned everything we could about some important sections of the National Electrical Code that provide different methods for calculating what will fit on someone's electric panel. And we did those calculations for every home to ensure that whatever we were recommending would fit on their existing panel. And in most cases, that was the case, that we were able to use their existing panel. We then developed contractor quote request packets, and we really iterated on that to try to come up with a format that contractors could use. Next, we issued those to all the contractors and got bids. Actually, sorry, take a step back. We had to recruit, of course, contractors from across 5 different trades. We screened over 50 contractors and 11 were selected to participate. Then we sent out the bid packets, we got them back and entered them into a massive database. There was some kind of revising quotes in some cases, but we used that data to then run financial projections. We went back and presented all of those findings to the homeowners about what costs would look like, what the plan was for their home, and we got their feedback on what they thought. And then today we're summarizing the findings and presenting those. Okay, so our criteria for selecting homes, we looked at the location. We wanted to have locations all across San Mateo County and consider different microclimates. For example, we chose Half Moon Bay and Pescadero because the climate out on the coast is different from inland. And north to south, there's actually some difference in climate. So we wanted to make sure we had a good spread from San Bruno and Brisbane all the way down to East Palo Alto. We also wanted to pay attention to home vintage. So we had a range, I think, from homes built in as early as the 1920s up to much more recently. We also wanted to look at home size. So I think our smallest home was 800 square feet, maybe 1,000 square feet. And then our largest was about 2,500 square feet. We also wanted to make sure we hit different homes with different panel sizes. So we had one home with a 60 amp panel, which is just about the lowest you'll find for a single family home in the county, all the way up to a 200 amp panel. I think we had 2 homes with 200 amp panels. And then we had a bunch that were in the middle with 100 amp panels, which is very common for a lot of the housing stock that was built after World War II here in San Mateo County. The other variable we wanted to pay attention to was income level. So 2 of the homeowners qualified for, we used a proxy for, we didn't want to ask someone about their income, but we used their participation in PG&E's low income program called CARE as a proxy for income. So we made sure to have 2 participants who qualify for PG&E's CARE program, and the other 8 did not. All right, so jumping into electrification plans. So someone maybe who just wants to look at the cost of electrification and may wonder, why are you telling us about electrification plans? Why is this so important? And I think this slide shows why it's important. It's a little bit busy, I apologize for that, but the gist of it is, if you look across the bottom, we have these clusters of homes home A, home B, home C, etc. And what you see is we looked with each home, we got quotes for, actually not for each home, but for many homes, we got quotes for both optimizing their existing panel, so not upsizing their electric service, for installing something called a smart panel, which we'll talk a little bit more about that later, or upsizing the service to 200 amps. There's a lot of discussion on message boards, at least here locally, that if you were going to electrify, you just automatically have to get a new, bigger electrical panel and a bigger service line from PG&E. This is generally not true. And so we wanted to show that people can generally use their existing panels, and this graph shows save a lot of money. So the blue bars, which is optimizing the existing panel, you can see are all universally below $5,000, generally closer to $2,000 or $2,500. Whereas going to a smart panel was significantly more, between $7,000 and $10,000 per home. And then you can see in home B, we wanted to know this home had an underground service wire. So the wire that came from their utility pole to the house was underground, as opposed to many of us have them overhead. For this person, swapping out that line that goes under the ground requires trenching. And so that can add $20,000 to the cost. So that's what you see is that tall yellow bar there. That person really wants to avoid a service line increase, and they can, if they can. And we showed that, in fact, they can. So the difference between that blue bar for home B and that yellow bar is, $25,000. So when someone says, well, why do you need a plan? This is why you need a plan. If you don't have a plan, you can end up being the person paying that $30,000 bill to increase your service line. If you have a plan, you can avoid that. Okay, so what is a plan? This is, it's very hard to read, but I just wanted to give you a broad overview of what the plan involves. On the left, we had, photos of the home, detailed descriptions of each project, the circuits that needed to be changed, the equipment that we were specifying. In the middle, you see the plans involve drawings, so detailed drawings, and with call outs for each of the different trades that were color coded, showing what that trade was being asked to do. And on the far right, we also gave them detailed electrical load calculations. So that shows, especially the electricians, yes, in fact, all of this can be added to the home's electrical panel, and it's not going to exceed the panel capacity according to the National Electrical Code. So for this presentation, we're going to focus on one of the homes in the study. This home was located in San Bruno. The square footage of the home was 1,700 square feet. There were 2 occupants. The main panel size is 100 amps, but we'll see in a minute that they actually had a fuse box, which is a really old piece of equipment, probably 70 years old. So we actually, we'll deal with this later, but we actually decided to swap that out for a more modern panel, but we kept the service line at 100 amps. The vintage of the home is 1958. So we felt like we're showing this one because we felt like it was pretty typical. But again, we did have a range of different home types in the study. So one of the things that Tom really noticed, but we saw in our data, the 10 homes under the red bracket are the 10 homes in this study. And each bar in this graph represents a home. So what does this say? This is telling us, when we asked each homeowner for their electric data from PG&E, both their electric and their gas data. And one of the things we noticed was like, wow, most people are not using their full panel capacity, like not even close. So none of the homes in the study started out using 40% of their panel capacity. So that told us, wow, this person has a lot of room to electrify here. You can see on the far right, my and Tom's home that are nearly all electric, and those even fully electric, the homes don't use their full panel capacity. So this was sort of a revelation to us, and really the data shows that that all the noise and all the panic about everyone needing a new electric panel just is completely wrong. So this brought,
Josie, I just wanted to be sure people understand those blue bars. That's the peak 15-minute or peak hour out of 8,760 hours of the prior year. So it's not like the monthly bill that averages everything out. It's when you were cooking on all the burners and had everything running in the house at the maximum level that you had done.
Yeah, that's right. The maximum power used in any 15-minute interval across the whole previous year is that blue part of the bar, again, showing even when you've maxed everything else in your home, you maxed everything out electrically, you're still not using your full panel. Thank you, Tom. Okay, so that brought us to this idea, which is, all right, so how do we optimize someone's existing panel? We call this panel optimization. And we were able to show, wow, you could really optimize, you could fully electrify a 2,000 square foot home, save them the $5,000 electrical panel upgrade, keep them on a 100 amp panel, and they're perfectly comfortable, happy, have all of the services they need. They're not skimping here. They've got great heat, great water heating. So we were able to do this technically to show that it can be done. And then we applied that to this approach we applied to the homes. So coming back to the San Bruno home, the photo on the left is their existing fuse box. I mentioned it's about 70 years old. This, from an electrical perspective, it's sufficient. From a practical perspective, we wanted to run new circuits into this box, and you can't like drill new holes for those fuse, put new fuses in. So we decided to go ahead and recommend that they swap out that old fuse box, 100 amp fuse box, for a 100 amp breaker panel. So same amount of electricity flowing through it. PG&E doesn't need to be involved, but they get a new breaker panel instead of this old fuse box. So from a safety perspective, it's probably better. The old fuse box has been serving them well, and there's been no issue, but it doesn't hurt to replace these. So this is a drawing, one of these detailed drawings we did to show that it's a little hard to see, but the yellow lines are new circuits. And we decided to bring, we wanted a new sub panel in the garage, because a lot of the equipment, the new electrical equipment we were going to be recommending was sited closer to the garage than to the back corner of the house where that main panel was. So this was a fairly significant expense, but in this case, we felt like it made more sense to get that sub panel in and then to run shorter circuits to the new equipment. So their existing water heater, we didn't have a great picture of it, but the one on the left is their crawl space. And on the far right of that picture, you can see their existing water heater. It was a 40-gallon gas water heater in the basement. We're recommending that they install a 65-gallon Rheem 15 amp heat pump water heater, still with a tank. So this piece of equipment is very similar. It's actually identical to one that I have installed in my garage, and it does a great job. You'll notice that we recommend going to a higher capacity. So from 40-gallon with the gas to 65-gallon with the heat pump water heater. And that's because the recovery time is a bit slower on the heat pump water heater. So if they have more hot water in reserve, it just gives them a little bit of buffer there. And the tanks these days, the modern tanks, are so well insulated that going to a bigger tank will not be a significant energy expense. With moving to the heat pump water heater, this little gold medallion in the top right just points out that they'll be using a third of the energy that the gas water heater used. So heat pump technology is so efficient. It's 3 times more efficient than, actually 4 times more efficient generally, but let's just say 3 to be conservative, than burning gas. All right, so the picture on the left is a centrally ducted gas furnace. We recommend swapping that out with this Mitsubishi 3-ton inverter-driven heat pump HVAC system. And again, this is ducted, so it just slots right into the on the right side of the slide, the gray box, the big dark gray box, that just goes right in where the gas furnace currently is. It's a very similar form factor. And then the condenser, the compressor on the far right, that will go sited outside somewhere. That's the thing that's kind of gathers up all the heat or the cool, depending on which season you're in, and sends that through a copper line set into the gray box to distribute through your ductwork. So for cooking, they started out with a 30-inch gas cooktop, and we recommended going to induction. So induction has heats up very quickly. It's very powerful, more powerful than gas for people who are kind of remember like the funky old electric stovetops with the coils, or maybe the ones that the radiant ones that would sort of get like a yellow glow under them. This is not those. This is not your grandmother's electric cooktop. So these are, high-end chefs use them in restaurants. So they're very, they serve the needs of someone who really likes to cook very well. So they're easy to adjust. They react quickly when you turn up the heat or down the heat, and they're very powerful. For clothes drying, they started out with a 7.5 cubic foot gas dryer. That's just a typical American size dryer, generally larger than a European size dryer. We recommended replacing it with a similarly sized Whirlpool hybrid heat pump dryer that uses less electricity than a standard resistance dryer. Okay, so for EV charging, we like chargers. In this case, we recommended a Wallbox Pulsar charger, but we like EV chargers that aren't huge, so they're not pulling, say, 50 amps. We like them on the lower side because as an EV owner, I can tell you the 50 amp car charger is total overkill. You don't need it. It's not great for your panel, and it's not great for the grid. And in this case, this one is adjustable. So we can actually adjust the current down if we need to in order to fit, quote unquote, fit on the panel. The option on the right is what I have at my home. And it's just a sort of the budget option, which is just an outlet that you can plug a mobile charger into. So one of the things that we really employ in our plans is circuit pausing and circuit sharing devices. So these allow you to take one, let's say, 240 volt circuit and share it between two devices, or pause the device if the capacity of the panel, your main panel, starts to get close to its maximum. So we tended to not use the circuit sharing as much as the circuit pausing devices, and we generally put those on the EV circuit. So if, let's say, 2 times a year, you have everything running in your home and you start to approach the capacity of the panel, it would pause your EV charging for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or however long that situation is occurring in your home. And then once the panel capacity frees up, then the EV charger would just automatically start again. The device on the right is something called a smart panel. This one is made by a company called span.io. The smart panel does this kind of instead of just at the single circuit level, it does it for all the circuits in the home. So it has intelligence, and you've pre-programmed it to say, hey, if my panel starts to reach capacity, first cut off the EV and then cut off the, maybe something incidental in your home. Maybe it would be the dryer. I don't know what it would be, but it would sort of shed each circuit, each load according to a pre-programmed list that you give it. We ended up pricing these, but not, there was one homeowner actually who was interested in this having the solution. Another advantage of it is if there's a power outage and you have solar and you need to cut back to only the amount of power that your solar system is producing, this smart panel can help you in that scenario. So we had a homeowner who was interested in that, but generally, price-wise, it was more affordable to use the circuit pausing devices on the EV chargers than to go with the whole smart panel solution. Okay, and the other thing we recommended for each of the homes that didn't have it already was solar, and we tried to max out, whatever their roof would be. So in this case, it was a 5.8 kW solar system and a 10 kilowatt hour battery system. We also, for this home, recommended improving their attic insulation. We noticed that their ductwork was old and not insulated in some cases. And so we did, for this home, we priced out replacing all the ductwork with really tight, well-insulated ducts. We didn't do that for every home, but in this case, we thought, some of the homes, the ductwork looked great. But in this home, we thought, it's to be conservative, we would recommend at least having the homeowner know that they might end up having to replace their ducts. So we did recommend that. Okay, so then that all comes together. You've seen this slide before, but it all comes together. All of these equipment choices, et cetera, all comes together in this quote request packet, which was sent to the contractors. So the value of an electrification plan. So number one, it really saves the homeowner money. If you just willy-nilly start electrifying, you can, without having an idea of kind of where you're headed, you can end up having a contractor come in and say, oh, let's get the high power water heater or the high power HVAC, power inefficient, I will say. And you can end up in a situation where by the last device, you're in a place where you actually do have to do a service line upgrade. If you can avoid that, that would be good. So the idea is to kind of have in mind everything you're going to do and kind of make your choices prudently so that you choose power efficient equipment from the very beginning, or know that you're going to use a circuit pauser on your EV charger, for example, in order to fit everything on your panel. So the other advantage of a plan is we found it really gives the homeowner confidence to get started. So a lot of the homeowners in this study really wanted to do something, but they didn't know how to start. So that's the plan helps with that. Then also, many homeowners aren't going to electrify all of their devices all at once. They're going to do it over, over a number of years. And so if you have that roadmap in hand, when the furnace goes out in 3 years, you can go back to your plan and say, okay, this is what was recommended. Let me get, a quote for this or something, maybe the latest version of this size system that was recommended for me. It also provides contractors with critical information. So we found that the contractors use the plans. They liked the drawings and the photos primarily, but some of them push back on some of the all the things we wanted to fit on the panel. And when we were able to show them, no, the load calculations according to the National Electrical Code says this will work, then they were they were more comfortable. So so we optimize using the panel with a plan. That's a critical component. It can also make permitting easier if city governments or building officials, might be able to use these plans to see, okay, I can see that this person's electrifying and this is all going to fit on the panel eventually. So that might speed the permitting. And so it helps homeowners avoid unnecessary work and expense. And so finally, we learned a lot about plans as we went along, what worked, what didn't, and what we would recommend going forward. So I'm not going to go through each of these. I mentioned some of them in the slides earlier, but we found that there were some pieces of equipment that really made this job of electrifying on someone's existing panel a lot easier. So 15 amp water heaters as opposed to 30 amp water heaters, which the heat pump water heaters, going for the lower amperage ones. You'll still get lots of hot water, but it'll be easier on the panel. Similarly, inverter driven heat pump HVAC systems were really critical. And those centrally ducted heat pumps that just slot right into where the furnace is for people who don't, who want to use their existing ductwork. We really like those. So I won't go through everything on this list, but we did find that there were certain pieces of equipment that were really, really helpful. So a few things that worked and didn't. The initial contractor recruitment, the county went out and sought contractors to apply. And in the end, there was one that kind of met the criteria. as opposed to 3. They were hoping to get 3 general contractors who could do all of the work. In the end, we decided it's probably more likely that most people won't use a general contractor, that they would go, and when the water heater goes out, they go to a plumber. When the HVAC dies, they would replace it by going to an HVAC person. So we decided to have the study reflect how people would actually probably interact with the contractors. But that made our jobs harder, because then we had to find 3 contractors for each of the 5 trades. So the initial interviews we did with the homeowners were very helpful. The 2-hour site visits were too long. We think we'd try to cut those back to about an hour. We were asked to do very detailed window measurements and door measurements and et cetera, et cetera. I think we found a way to avoid that in the end. Those measurements went into the manual J calculations, which were sort of maybe a little bit of overkill. Again, the gold standard for the HVAC industry, but we found other ways to get that data, which was using their previous year's gas bill data to figure out what size heating system they would need. Electrical data was super useful. The digital drawings that we did were a lot of effort, and even though the contractors valued them, I think it's probably not practical to do those for every home. The first quote requests we did had a lot of words, and we realized that the contractors preferred documents that just didn't require a lot of reading. So pictures and drawings were helpful. Doing the electrical load calculations according to the NEC was really critical, because like I said, some of the contractors were misinformed about maybe didn't do the calculations or did them in a different way. And so it was helpful that we really knew how to do that. It was challenging to make all these design choices and keeping all of the home's constraints in mind. So we collected a lot of data, photos, measurements, input about the home and the homeowner. So it was hard to kind of keep all that data organized. And then in the moment you're making a decision, take it all into account. So data organization was a challenge. So some specific problems we encountered. One was we couldn't access one home due to COVID concerns. So we had that homeowner just send us photos and measurements, and that actually worked okay. We didn't actually need to go in the home. We went to the home and saw the outside, but we didn't go in. Information organization was a challenge. We ended up building different versions of web tools to keep all of that information in one place that was useful. The third problem here was standard power appliances, just the things that the contractors recommend don't always allow you to stay on the panel. So that's when we identified this list of sort of these silver bullet power efficient appliances. We also encountered one building official who told a contractor that a home needed a bigger panel and a service line when it actually didn't. In that case, we actually met with the building department, and in the end, they agreed with us, but it just required some education. We struggled to find appropriate contractors. One of our criteria was that they had to have at least 4 stars or better on Yelp, and then also kind of be willing to work in this way, not to go to the home. All of the contractors just reviewed our plans and bid based on our plans. That's a really important thing to mention. And not all contractors are willing to do that. Some of them actually many of them required going to the home. And since that wasn't allowed by the study, we just had to rule out a lot of contractors. So this will be familiar to people who've done big projects, but we had trouble getting the contractors to respond and provide the quotes after we had sent them the information. So we had to pull in another person actually to really help chase down the quotes. And sometimes the contractors made errors in the quotes. So they didn't read the plan carefully, or they got 2 plans confused. So there was quite a bit of work. And I would say almost maybe half of our work in this project, half the hours in this project, was following up with the contractors and trying to request revisions to their quotes to be accurate for what the home actually needed. And then finally, one of the biggest challenges that Tom had, which he was manipulating the data, was sometimes the contractors grouped together a bunch of things that we wanted to see separately. And so we either went back to the contractors and asked them to break it out, or we made educated guesses about how you would break these things out. And I think this is it, and we'll go to questions. My last slide here was just recommendations for going forward. One was we would simplify the process to speed things up. So keep the home visits to less than an hour and skip all the real detailed measurements and find kind of good ways to estimate things like what kind of heating system size they need. Focus those home visits on taking pictures and looking at like key constraint measurements, but don't measure every window. Develop tools for making plans fast. In the end, I ended up developing a tool that I've been using, and I'm happy to make that available to others. zerocarbon-home.com. We eliminated the detailed drawings. Going forward, those drawings are just too time intensive. So using Google satellite images to estimate, like if you've been to the house, for example, where the main panel is on the house, and where the dryer is going in the garage, and you can use Google Earth to see, oh, that's about a 40-foot circuit run, for example, as opposed to getting your measuring tape out and trying to measure that at the house. We would recommend eliminating manual J calculations. They just require too much detailed data, and they're more complicated to do. So using gas bill data to estimate their HVAC sizing, we did both side by side, and we found that they were generally in the same ballpark. So going forward, using the gas bill data was much easier, and so we would do that going forward. We would recommend identifying contractors who are willing to submit quotes via a standard form. In the end, all of the contractors we worked with just gave us quotes the way they tend to give quotes. And again, they ended up bundling costs together in ways that were unhelpful. And so if you could find contractors who are willing to kind of fill out a form, how much does this circuit cost? How much does, installing this EV charger cost? What if you added a circuit pauser to it? What does that cost? That would help make the data crunching and comparisons much easier. And then make sure those form fields, of course, map to the data that the best output for decision making. We did not do that in the beginning, and so that ended up being challenging for us. Identifying some sort of better incentive to recruit the contractors for participating in the study. We would recommend that the county offered $100 to each contractor for each quote they provided. So if they did 10 homes, it'd be $1,000. But they had to sign a contract from the county, and many of the contractors felt like signing a contract for $1,000 wasn't worth it, and so they did it. They were sort of stuck. They didn't want to be paid, but it was still a lot of work. So some of them just dropped out or said they would do it at first and then didn't follow through. Some sort of better incentive to attract contractors to participate would be helpful. And then educating billing officials in any jurisdiction where you're working about panel optimization and that approach would be helpful. Okay, I know that was a lot of information, but do people have clarifying questions? And Alira, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so we do have a few questions here. Let's see how many we can get answered in this short amount of time. So the first one is, how can a homeowner tell what their max amp usage is, especially when they have solar?
Yeah, with solar, it's harder, and maybe Tom can speak to that since he actually has solar and so has wrestled with that issue.
Yeah, thanks. So the part of the code that we use where we look at that data, we sometimes can apply it. It's NEC code 220.87, and you can show space to add electrification. Usually using that part of the code, it only works for adding 1 or 2 projects at a time. In this county project, we were trying to add 5 big projects. So we were using a different part of the code where we built everything up. That graph that Josie showed you, the blue and green bars, that was just illustrating the situation of where these loads are. And the place you get that data is from your My PG&E account. It's spelled MY, PG, and E, I think. And anyway, that provides hourly or 15-minute data on your own home, whether you have solar or not. It's just that the code doesn't let you use that for showing code compliance.
Yeah, and on PG&E's website, if you log into your account there, I think it's like annual electricity usage, something annual energy usage, and then you download. There's green button data. You download. It'll download 2 files. It'll download your gas for the last year, and you have to type in the dates that you want. So if you type in a full year in the date section, it'll give you the full year's data, 2 files, one for gas and one for electricity.
Thank you. So the next question we have is, what was the model of the 30-inch induction cooktop?
That was a Frigidaire. You can buy it at Home Depot, and it gets really good ratings, like 4.5 stars, with hundreds of reviews.
Thank you. We have a question comment, and it says, please comment, a lot of scary panic stories that electrification opponents shout about are more about home being old, equipment wears out, insulation is lacking, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll get into the cost data, but we found, even redoing the ducts and adding attic insulation, that this home, doing all of that work together with all the incentives that are offered, was going to be cheaper than replacing the gas appliances like as they were out with new gas appliances. So going electric plus insulating plus doing the panel work and everything was going to be cheaper than replacing a gas furnace with a gas furnace and a gas water heater with another gas water heater. So we found that because the incentives are so generous right now, we found that going electric was actually cheaper. Yeah.
Thank you. And I believe this will probably be our last question. Did you exclude homes with solar panels from the study? We went through some of these considerations when we replaced our solar panels 2 years ago. Don't solar panels and time of use affect the decision you're talking about?
We did not exclude. We had 2 homes that already had solar. One had a Tesla solar roof, and the other just had normal solar panels. So we did not exclude solar customers. And people who already have solar, if you're just covering your current electrical needs, then you might want to add some more solar if you can to cover your new electrical needs. If you do that, you will be better off financially than having solar and a gas home, because your new solar the electricity is going to be cheaper than the gas, and BTU for BTU. So if you have solar now and you're thinking about electrifying, and your current solar won't cover your new loads, your new electrical loads, then consider adding more solar if you can.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for answering our questions. At this time, we're going to have to move on, but hopefully we'll be able to answer more of your questions during the Q&A portion at the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for your patience. Okay, so let's jump into, this is a short section, working with home contractors. We just had some observations that we wanted to share. So we've got 3 bullet points to cover here: barriers, opportunities, and recommendations. So on the right here is one of the contractors we worked with, Hugo Conchas, who's the owner of Ideal Electric. And, we got to know all the contractors who participated. They're all hardworking people who are trying to run small businesses in San Mateo County. And, by the fact that we only chose people who had 4 stars or higher on Yelp, pretty successful at what they're doing. Here's a list of the participating contractors. We are not going to identify like who bid what, but for at that level of detail in this presentation, but we did want to share who we chose to work with, and so that's available. Okay, so some of the barriers we found in working with contractors on electrification. One was the recruiting issue in the beginning, right? The way we were doing the project was they weren't going to come on site, and so that was a problem for some. But then, so some of them really they will refuse to do a job if they can't actually come on site. So that's a big hurdle. That won't necessarily be the case for
individual homeowners who are trying to electrify, but it might be a challenge for someone who's trying to do a study in maybe another county similar to the one that we did here. So I just wanted to give you a heads up about that. The contractors didn't necessarily read the plans very carefully. I mentioned this before. So I think there's some improvement that could happen on how do we convey the right amount of information in the way that contractors can use it, especially if they're not going on site. We asked the contractors to bid different permutations, like, hey, bid this house with a smart panel, bid it with a service line increase, bid it without. And that was challenging for them. They're busy. They've got jobs to do. And I think kind of wrapping their head around the scenario, especially because they weren't seeing the house. And we were asking them to do something, smart panels were new to some of the contractors. Optimizing panels was new to some of the electricians we worked with. So there was like an education issue there, but then asking them to do all these permutations was just challenging. Some were able to make use of the plans and the load calculation. Some even appreciated them. They said things like, oh, wow, you did the load calcs. Oh, that saves me time. But it wasn't the norm. That we got a little bit of pushback from some of the contractors. I think I mentioned this on two things. One was sizing of heat pumps. We found that the HVAC contractors generally wanted to oversize versus, what the manual J calculation said the home needed. And talking to many HVAC contractors, there's a range in how people do the sizing, but the ones who size closer to the manual J calculations said that contractors who don't do those calculations oversize because they don't want to get caught, with callbacks because they sized it too small. So they'd rather oversize it and make sure the customer is happy. But that also ends up being a less efficient piece of equipment for that homeowner and not necessarily providing the optimal experience. So we ran into that. But again, when we said, hey, we did the manual J calculations, this is what the home needs, we did find that the HVAC contractors deferred to us, like, oh, okay, then I'm good with that. So similarly on the electrical load calculations, we did get some pushback. But again, when we showed them the actual calculations and showed them that this was per code, again, they said, oh, okay, I'm fine with that. So some opportunities we saw, one was contractors love photos. So when we added more photos into our bid packets, that really improved the results that we were getting in terms of like the communication with them. So, and the quality of the bids back. Again, although not all the contractors use those details and the load calcs, some really appreciated them. So, finding contractors who do value the load calculations and the extra detail, that might be a proxy for those who can, kind of appreciate some of these panel optimization techniques that we were trying to do. Screening contractors based on whether they value these plans, again, maybe a way to kind of see like who's ready to step into, to learn and to sort of step into the unknown a little bit and willing to take a little bit of risk, but maybe trying to up their game in terms of the services that they're offering and the learning they're willing to do to take their business to the next level. And some seemed really interested and to understand that a good plan could actually help them streamline their work, right? If someone came to a plan and they didn't have to roll a truck to go see the project, but they got exactly the information they needed to bid the project well, and they end up getting the project, but they got to skip sending the appraiser out to do the appraisal. They could see, oh, wow, I could do twice as many jobs if I didn't have, if I could eliminate that step. So some people really appreciated it. So recommendations going forward, we think revamping the electrification plan format, the one, we did several iterations, but it's still not perfect. So looking at that, maybe with a team of high performance contractors to come up with an ideal format for these electrification plans, I think would be helpful. Another recommendation would be to identify these high potential contractors and train them. So you'd be looking for people who are eager to learn, comfortable with new technology, good with customers, and ready to grow. Some contractors out there do a certain amount of business and they're not ready to grow. But for electrification, we're going to need to really grow our contractor base, and individual companies are going to have to be able to scale quickly. Maybe create some networks of contractors that are trained in how to do home electrification and panel optimization specifically. You can maybe identify the ones who do electrification best, maybe offer some public recognition or prizes for those contractors who really excel at this. And then make it easy for homeowners to find these contractors who are trained in this way, I think would be very helpful. It would reduce a lot of friction in the process. The horror stories that someone mentioned in the Q&A. So another set of recommendations here is, so let's train contractors. What do you want to train them in? The National Electrical Code electrical load calculations, so that they know what will actually fit on a panel, as opposed to guessing wrong, guessing that you need a panel upsize when you don't. Train them in how to do whole home electrification plans. So maybe an HVAC contractor could do a whole home plan and, at least know, well, you need at least 15 amps for that heat pump water heater you're eventually going to put in, and you're going to want an EV charger, et cetera. So they know all the other pieces that have to go on the panel, so they can think about what they're recommending to you from the HVAC perspective. But so maybe, maybe each contractor type could learn how it all fits together, as opposed to just understanding their one piece. And then understanding, you want to definitely teach the technical differences between a gas equipment and an electric equipment. I think that's probably obvious, but heat pump water heater is different from a gas water heater. So those technical differences are important to convey in any kind of training. And then training could also include siting requirements for electrification equipment. So for example, an HVAC compressor needs to be a certain number of feet setback from your property line in different jurisdictions. So just kind of key considerations that are different in some cases for electric equipment. Okay, so that was a short section, and I'm happy, and Tom and I are happy to take some clarifying questions.
Thank you so much, Josie. The first question that I have for you is, how far off are oversized systems versus what the call suggested? System install cost and energy performance.
I'm not sure I understood the question. Can you repeat it? Oh, yeah. Tom, go for it.
So was it about HVAC systems?
It doesn't specify. It says how far off are oversized systems versus what the calls suggest. System install costs.
Yeah, I'll address it a little bit. There was a great presentation yesterday in a PG&E online class by another contractor in the East Bay, Larry Waters at Electrify My Home. And he was talking about this, and he's one of the contractors who's making this transition into full home electrification. And several times he stressed being a good steward of the electric panel. And he's also stressing the really the benefits of downsizing these heat pumps, radically downsized compared to the size of the rocket furnaces, the rocket gas furnaces that we have, that quickly overheat the home and then turn themselves off and leave you coasting along until it's too cold, and then they blast back on. So he's finding that with his clients, they can size these systems down. They're trying to be typically around 2 tons for Bay Area homes. And, that's just a lot less thermal power, but they just run it steadily. And the thing adjusts all the time. So there's the oversizing that's going on is kind of fear-based on the contractor part. They want to be sure they don't get any callbacks from customers who are not figuring out how to operate their system properly. The way you operate a heat pump is you don't set it back to a very low temperature at night. If you're expecting it to catch up quickly in the morning, you set it down to only a moderately low temperature at night, so it can catch up in the morning.
Yeah, and I can share one example. In one of the homes at Redwood City Ranch Home, we had a contractor who bid, I think, a 5-ton system where we knew they needed a 3.5-ton system. So it's a pretty big difference.
Right. In a prior project I was on, we were were speccing, I think, a 3-ton system, and the contractor came in with a 5-ton system and a gas furnace. It was a hybrid system. And so that kind of thought pattern, it was appropriate in the 1950s with those heat pumps, but it wasn't, it just doesn't seem appropriate for that house with modern heat pumps. Modern heat pumps are able to operate well and stay online down to negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit. So temperatures we don't get in the Bay Area. So these things can keep working. They don't need alternatives. They don't need backups like that.
Thank you. Well, we have one other question. It should be a quick one. Did any of the homeowners you created plans for move forward with any of the electrification projects you identified for them?
We haven't followed up with everyone, but yes, we had, we know about one homeowner who went forward with a heat pump water heater and was very happy. I'm trying to think, I'm scrolling. One person who went forward with solar, although it was not with one of the contractors that we got bids from. I'm assuming there have been more, but we haven't followed back with everyone on this. We've been working on presenting the results, so.
Thank you so much, Josie and Tom, for answering our questions. Please feel free to move on.
Okay, great. All right, Tom, over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Josie. All right, so in this homeowner economics section, we'll be talking about the kind of the full costs, what we're calling the installation cost. That's the equipment plus installation and permits. We can break it down by appliance, so the heat pump system for heating and cooling versus the water heater, et cetera. We'll talk about the rebates for each of these things. And then when you subtract rebates and other incentives from full cost, you get the net installation costs after rebates. And then I think Josie will get into some cash flow analysis. So on we go. So Josie, did you want to address this?
Sure. A lot of people maybe signed up for this webinar and they only want to know one thing is, what does it cost to electrify? And is it more expensive than gas? So let's just get that out of the way. We'll come back to this slide and kind of a further analysis later. But the quick answer is it's cheaper when you look at all of the incentives. It's actually cheaper to go electric, just looking at capital costs here. Actually, this is capital and operating costs, sorry. So the quick answer is it's cheaper to go electric, and we'll get into lots more detail. And starting out with what is just the sticker, the sticker price, the capital cost up front, which Tom is going to get into now.
All right, thanks. So that thing that was just showing there was a 1-year snapshot of the year 2030 after a home had electrified, and showing that the cost of the utility bills remaining and the financing to cover the incremental cost of the electrification combined together were lower than the cost of just re-upping with gas equipment as your gas equipment burns out, staying on gas and paying all those utility bills. Okay, and next. Okay. So now these raw costs for the installation. So this is the equipment plus installing it plus the permits. The actual cost to the homeowner will be cheaper because the homeowners get the incentives and rebates, and so that'll reduce it. And then also we found an artifact of the way we were doing the study, and also being in the COVID period where the contractors didn't get to go to the homes. Some contractors were telling us they needed to bid higher to us in these estimates since they hadn't gone to the project site and hadn't seen everything, so they weren't sure there wouldn't be obstacles. So there's a little bit of price lift in there. Next. So these graphs, there are going to be a lot of graphs that have this basic format. This is the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning bids for the 10 homes labeled A through J, and then the average of the 10 homes to the right. And so the blue bar on this graph is the low bid out of 3, and then the medium bid is in red, and the high bid is in gold. So there you can see these are the range of bids we're getting for HVAC systems for the homes. So then go ahead to the next. Now here's the same thing for water heaters. Now, home A already had an electric water heater, so that's why there's nothing showing in home A. But the other homes, 8 of them were bid on regular tank heat pump water heaters, where the heat pump is attached to the tank. And that one at home F had a very short crawl space that the water heater would have to go into to replace the gas tankless water heater under the house. And to do that, we end up specifying a split system, which costs more capital money. It has an outdoor unit, just like a regular heating heat pump, and then water lines running to a tank, and then it stores very hot water in this short tank and supplies that from under the house. So anyway, there's the cost there. You can see the blue bids, the low bids were around $5,000, and then there was others at $7,500 and over. Next. Then electric panel bids, not all the homes needed work that really fell into the category of electric panel. Some of the homes had work where they would need a sub panel installed to help arrange all the circuits, or they needed work done on the main panel. So here they are again, low, medium, and high. And then you can see that highest bar, about $14,000. That was kind of like a foul ball that occurred in one of the houses where the contractor went to the county or city jurisdiction and started working on the plan with them, and was told they needed to upsize it. But later, we were able to correct that with the building department. They could see we were conforming to the building code, the electric code, excuse me, the 220.83 section. And so then they didn't have to do that upsize. But that's just an example of what's out there, is people automatically thinking you always have to upsize when you don't. If you remember, again, that graph we showed that had the blue usage was much less than the panel capacity for most people. Next. All right, so now all these homes involved adding more circuits. Somebody asked in the Q&A, what about knob and tube homes who have these old knob and tube wires? And my answer was, well, we don't really use any of the old wires for this new electrification. It goes in with new circuits, brand new circuits, and conduit with new shiny wires. And so you can still keep your knob and tube. The knob and tube is not involved in the electrification. And so here's the circuit bid costs. We've seen things from about $2,500 on up over $7,500 for the different costs. You can see some spread among the bids. Different contractors assess it different ways. Next.
Actually, I'll just jump in here, Tom, and say the reason we're showing you these gross costs is because this is not what people will pay out of pocket because there are incentives. But the reason we're showing this to you is because you hear, if you go out and get a bid, you're going to get a bid like this, and you hear these numbers being tossed around by people. And one other reason to show you these is you can see the difference between the low bids and the high. So you can get a very, very high bid for any of this electrification work. You can find high bids, but if you do a little bit of shopping, you can get much more affordable installation costs. So there's a lot of benefit to shopping.
Yeah, thanks, Josie. Here's the same thing now done for EV chargers. And so Home D already had an EV charger. And so that's why that one's not there. But again, we see a span. And in these EV chargers, this is when we're doing the optimization. And most of these EV chargers, we include in the cost having a circuit pauser that will let them put a bigger EV charger on the panel that pauses a couple of times a year when you're having a big cookie baking party and everything else in the house is running. It may pause for 15 minutes. Anyway, that's the range of bids for that. Next. All right, now I'm going to stack up all those bids in this one. So this is called the gross cost to decarbonize the home. And we're dealing with San Mateo County, which is all served by Peninsula Clean Energy, which has 100% carbon-free energy matching to all the new loads, in fact, all the old loads too. So you can decarbonize the house without solar or batteries. So this is showing it without solar or batteries. The house is decarbonized and the car. And then drawn across there is what if you, what's the reference cost for replacing your gas furnace, your gas water heater, your gas cooktop, and your gas dryer when they burn out? And that's $13,000 is staying with gas. And then here's the capital cost across the 10 homes, and then the average to the right of all the projects. And that pink insulation colored one towards the top is insulation. So that was included in several of the homes, needed to try to keep the heat pump sizing down so it could stay on the ducts so we wouldn't have too much ductwork cost. But ductwork is also shown the very highest bar in gold on the couple of homes that had old ductwork that had problems that probably needed replacement. Then when you don't see the ductwork gold bar at the very top, we think the home would work without changing the ducts. Anyway, so you can see now these are those the range in those scary stories people tell about it costs so much. And so they leave out the fact that it would cost $13,000 to stay with gas. And then they leave out all the incentives, and we'll get to those next. All right. So here's a little table of the incentives we were including. Rebates from PCE in that top row. And so those were 3,000. We didn't use the extra $500 that's available right now. If you get your heat pump or your heat pump water heater installed now through March 31st, there's an extra $500 we didn't count in our analysis, but PCE is providing those $3,000 and $3,500 incentives. Bayren is providing incentives of about $2,000 for insulation, $800 for ductwork, $1,250 for HVAC, and $750 for induction cooking. Now, this next row called Rebate IRA, that's the Federal Inflation Reduction Act, pronounced IRA, and it is being designed, the state is designing their side of standing this up, which probably will come out in late 2023, maybe early 2024. We don't know if it'll be retroactive back to projects done, say, after, done after the first of this year. So we don't know that it'll be retroactive. I keep hearing that it won't be, so it probably won't be. And then it'll be available starting probably, as soon as they stand it up and tell us the availability date. So they need to tell us the date they will accept projects after. Anyway, it's a big rebate through the federal IRA, $14,000 per household. It kind of creates a household electrification savings account for free for you that you can tap into. So low-income customers have access to $14,000 in that account, stored at the US Treasury. Medium income customers and have access to $7,000, and high income customers don't have access to the rebate part of the IRA. Now, all customers have access to the federal tax credits that started January 1st. They are 30% of the cost after all the other rebates above it. They're available right now. In fact, you could lower your withholding planning to take the credit. You don't have to wait till April 2024 to harvest it if you want. Anyway, for these credits, you must have some taxable income. And they amount to about $2,000 on heat pumps and $2,000 on heat pump water heaters. An interesting thing about the federal IRA tax credits, you can't get them. You're limited to a total of $2,000 in each tax year. So it's like the IRA is encouraging you to stage your projects and do the water heater in 1 year and the space heater in another year. There's also a $1,200 per year credit available on basic insulation, ductwork, and replacement windows, better windows, better doors, et cetera. There's a $600 tax credit on electric panel upsizing. Too bad about upsizing. Anyway, but there's also the tax credit for solar and batteries. I put no cap on that. It's actually, there are caps. I forget how big they are, but they're much bigger than the systems we dealt with in this study. Next. All right, so now we'll get into a few concrete examples of space heating and cooling. So you can see on the left, we've got the far left is the air handler. It's got the fan and the cooling and heating coils that goes indoors, say in your garage where your furnace has been. It's the same size as your furnace. And then the outdoor unit's that compressor. They come together in a system. Anyway, here's one of the quotes from a contractor for $13,000. And then the PCE rebate knocks $3,500 off of that. Bayren, another $1,250. In 2024, the customer could get an IRA rebate if they were low income of $8,000, if they were medium income of $4,000. Anyway, the tax credit is 30% of whatever's left over in that cost, and the total cost was for the low income customer starting around 2024 is $800, $794, compared to just a gas furnace and no air conditioner would be $4,800 for that customer. And with an air conditioner, it adds another $4,800. So it's $9,600. So these incentives are big. I think we may be at a period I call peak incentive. Next. Let's do water heating. It's on everyone's mind. So here's a typical quote I showed you. There were water heaters bids being out there at about a little over $5,000. The PCE rebate of $3,000, bay rent of $1,000. This one I'm doing it for. Notice in the top title, I'm doing it for this year, 2023. So there's no IRA rebate, and the tax credit is available. It's at $354. It's 30% of whatever was remaining. And so you pay the 70% of what was remaining. That's only $828. That compares to, say, a $2,600 gas water heater. That's the common bid you would get for staying with gas. So would you rather pay $800 or $2,600 and have the liability? Let's go to the next year, 2024. Now the same thing, only for a low income customer, this would be showing the $1,100 IRA. Well, actually, the IRA was up to $1,750. It only took $1,182 to zero out the bid, zero out the total cost. And anyway, the water heater's free to the low income customer. And it's almost free to the middle income customer. And there's, some cost, we'll show it in another graph. There's a little bit of cost to the high income customer, but all of them are less than $2,500 for a gas water heater. And next. So this is an example for one home. The data is here. I believe this is that home that Josie was showing in San Bruno.
That's right.
And it's showing the projects are each in rows. So the upper left is what we do with their electric panel, and then the next row down has the electric circuits we were looking at adding and what is their cost. Then the water heater is on the next row. Then HVAC, the heat pump for ventilation and cooling and heating, next row, and then a cooking. We looked at replacing the dryer with a heat pump dryer. Then attic insulation was used in that home, but we didn't need to do wall or floor insulation in that home, and some ductwork replacement, actually significant ductwork replacement in that home, and an EV charger. So altogether, the costs are summed up. And so we have estimates for, on the far right, the high bid, and then next to it, the medium bid, and next to that, highlighted in yellow, the low bid. And then to the left of that is a do-it-yourself estimate for some of the projects that are do-it-yourself. Sometimes in the do-it-yourself column, if it's gray, that's a cell that we use the low bid price for. We figured, most people aren't as ambitious as wanting to take that on as DIY. But in the other cells, we show a few DIY projects. So you sum all these things up in these subtotals. And so looking at the low bid, it's $11,000 for the gross costs of the low bid set of projects. And, that's oh, excuse me, I said gross. That's for the net cost after incentives. So it's $11,000 for the net cost after incentives. And if we look at the kind of in the middle, there's replaced with existing gas. It would have been, in this how $17,966 to just get gas replacements. But using the low bid electric replacements and the incentives, it's down to $11,000. So it's less than staying with gas. And then below, there were some solar and battery estimates as well, and what is their net cost. And so about $16,800 for the net cost of solar and batteries to get them installed after the 30% tax credit on both. There's now a tax credit on batteries. Next. All right, and next. Okay, so I showed you those earlier graphs in different colors that went appliance by appliance. Those were the gross costs for each appliance at each home. Here's the same thing after the incentives. And now I've taken a look out, say, the 2024 situation where there are federal IRA incentives that parse out on low income, medium, or high income. And so taking those incentives into account, we see the 10 homes and the average to the right, and the dotted line for the average cost of keeping, of re-upping with a gas heat pump, excuse me, a gas furnace would be about $7,900. But the net cost of doing these other projects for the low bids, the blanks you see in A, B, and C homes, it's zero net cost. Same with home E and J, zero net cost. Then for medium income customers, they have net costs around $2,500. One of them's home F, almost, it's a complex home. I think that one, let me just look. Yeah, that one has actually 3 buildings. It's got 2 separate buildings that both need HVAC, so their costs got a bit higher. That's why that one's up there. But most of us operate one building and it can use one system. All right, next. So for water heaters, you can see the gas water heater costs about $2,700 shown in the dotted line. And the net costs for the 10 different homes, if they, again, it's on the pink bar, it's if they were a low income home. On the green bar, it's if that same home had a middle income family in there. And the purple bar would be if they had a high income family there. All the things that look blank are zero net cost. Typically for it looks like it's mostly for the low income customers. And again, home F was that it's that complex 3 building compound, and it had the underfloor water heater that needed a split system. But all the ones that needed regular tank water heaters, look at them. Even for high income people, they're down around $1,000, way less than the $2,800 for gas water heater. Next. Net cost for circuits. Okay, so we don't, we had to add circuits in all the houses, and the net costs, you can see they're kind of clustering, or somewhere around $2,000. You can see the average is off to the right, though, if you want to know the real average. For middle income customers, it was about $2,000 worth of circuits added when we separate the circuits from the projects. Next. And then for the homes that needed panel work, so far the incentives I've found are not differentiated on income. So after incentives, the panel work in our optimized plans was about $1,000 for most, well, it was zero for a bunch of homes. It was about $1,000 for 5 homes and almost $3,000 for one. Next. All right. And so this will explore then the kind of that same thing. Now I'm going to stack up all the appliances, and I've taken the gross cost and subtracted the incentives, and we're showing the gas to gas replacement line that doesn't get incentives. It's the $13,000 horizontal line. And now you can see, essentially for high income, this is a high income customer who doesn't get those 2024 IRA incentives, any of them. They do get the tax credits like everyone. And so their costs are about the same as staying with gas and not making any progress. And so then next, we'll see how it affects medium income customers. And so for medium income customers, their costs tend to be lower than the cost of staying with gas. And we'll go to low income customers. Their costs are much lower in most cases than staying with gas. And so, yeah, and that I'm seeing that, house J, that was the ranch style house. Oh, and the big thing there, we didn't show you the picture. That giant bluish bar in column J is a massive 48-inch, $12,000 gas range, high-end luxury range, replaced with another one in this low-income example. It's maybe not what would really happen if the household were low income. So that's maybe the reason why that bar J sticks up. Next. So any clarifying questions about the cost estimates we got, the way we got them, the incentives, that we showed? Just, was it clear what I was showing?
Hi, Tom. We do have a few questions for you. One of them is, someone would like to hear what factors drove the variations between bids on the same home. Was it different equipment costs, different labor hours, something else? And what were the characteristics of contractors that tended to bid lower?
Right. So we provided the same bid packet to all three contractors in each trade on each home. So we'll go with a simple one, heat pump water heaters. So we provided the same spec. We said, we're looking for a 15 amp, 65 gallon heat pump water heater installed in this location. We show them pictures of the location, say in the garage. And so they can see all the pipes nearby, and they can see the picture of how they'll manage the condensate and all that. And we showed them the little floor plan, and they could see how long the circuit was, because some of them include the circuit in their bid. So we standardized what we're asking for. And then what comes back, and you see variation, they have different costs of doing business or different appetites to get the jobs. And so the ones who bid low maybe want the job more, and the ones who bid high have other things to do, and they don't want that job at that location, et cetera. That to me kind of explains contractor pricing. And
I can jump in,
yeah,
Tom. So it's an interesting question. I think what Tom was trying to address in the beginning of what he said was the equipment was the same across the different bids. In some cases, we actually gave them the brand, maybe we give them the general spec and said like Rheem, and they ended up coming back and bidding, let's say Rheem for the water heater. So generally the equipment was all the same. So the thing that's different, and we don't have, we don't know the accounting systems of these contractors, but there's two things that could be different from what I can deduce. One is their labor costs, so what they pay their workers. The other is their profit. So, some companies want higher profit margins, and so they charge higher prices. Maybe they're targeting a different customer segment. Maybe they really only want to work for high income customers, for example. That's kind of who they serve. So I would say the difference comes down to one of two things: either what the contractors pay their laborers, or how much profit they take.
mm-hmm.
Thank you. Another question I have for you both is, did heat pump water heater bids include any plumbing changes, examples, addition of drain line for condensation when replacing gas water heaters?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, they always include managing the condensate.
Yeah, generally we assessed whether there was a condensate, whether there was a drain somewhere nearby, like a sink to drain the condensate. That was very common, like a utility sink in a garage. And if there wasn't, we had the condensate line drained to the exterior of the home. So I would say maybe in 30% of cases we had that. But absolutely, yes. Anytime you're installing a heat pump, you need to manage condensate.
Right.
So yes.
And this condensate is clean water. It's condensing out of the humidity in the place it is. My heat pump water heater is in my basement, and it dries out my basement. And that's really useful after the atmospheric rivers put an inch of water in my basement.
Thank you. This one is more of a comment that I think they were hoping that you both could comment on. And it says, seems that EVSEs should be separated from the home decarbonization. Otherwise, add in the cost of replacement gas car as the counterfactual.
Yeah.
So,
go ahead.
yeah, we'll get into that later. We haven't looked at cash flows or kind of operating expenses. Tom was just looking at sort of the sticker prices, right? And those were the graphs that we just showed. So in order to install an EV charging outlet, there's no equivalent really for a gas car. You don't install a gas station in your garage. So that is an additional cost. So just looking at the upfront costs. In a minute, we're going to get into the operating. We'll look at also the operating costs, and we did include the EV, the savings, because when you switch to electric, you end up paying much lower fuel costs to run your car across the year. So we did incorporate that. And when we looked at the difference in capital costs between a gas car and an EV, we looked at two equivalent cars, one being the Chevy Bolt and the equivalent gas car that Chevy makes, which is a Chevy Trek, I think it was called. And what we found was with the $7,500 federal tax credit, or is it a rebate? Sorry, I think it's a rebate for EVs. That the EV is actually cheaper from a capital cost perspective. So it's cheaper to run it. The fuel is about a third of the cost of gasoline, and it's also cheaper to buy it. So generally, the person is going to be better off both capital cost wise and operating cost wise after rebates.
And I hear it's cheaper to maintain it too.
It is.
I have EV envy still. I still drive a gas guzzling Prius.
Any other questions, Alera?
Yes, we have a few, and we have a little time, so we're okay. Could you share the breakdown of your assumed $13,000 gas-to-gas replacement cost?
I think it was very roughly $7,500 for the. Actually, let's see. Do we have it? We might have. So $7,500 roughly for the gas furnace.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was around $2,500 or so, maybe $2,800 for the gas water heater. Mm-hmm. Around $1,000 for the gas range, and I think a little bit less for the gas dryer. Maybe roughly $1,000 for the gas dryer. So I don't know what that adds up to.
Right. So that's a little shy of it, but because that's about 12,000 in that add up. So it was just slightly higher than that, making 13,000, but it was for the 4 devices.
Thank you. The next question is, with the older homes, did you run into any situations where asbestos or lead paint abatement was needed, or anything else unexpected?
We had one home where they think they had asbestos, not on all of the ducts, but on some of the boots for the ducts. So I believe in that home, we assumed there would be duct replacements, and otherwise we did not encounter asbestos. And then what was the other? Oh, mold or lead paint. Generally, we weren't dealing with painting situations. Like in the equipment we were touching, we weren't, there was no painting involved. And so we didn't take that into account. And in terms of mold, I think that was the other thing that was mentioned. I didn't see it, but I don't think it would be affected by the systems that we were touching. But Tom, tell me if you disagree.
Yeah, my general theory on it is those are problems that exist unrelated to electrification, and electrification, for say, for example, mold and moisture, electrification can help reduce the future problems. But whether homes need additional work, they need it regardless of electrifying if they've got those problems. So it's not part of, to me, it's not part of the cost of electrifying. And then entities that want to work on those problems, may want to budget for those problems separately than budgeting for climate preservation.
Thank you. And the last question should be a shorter one. Are you showing the cost, the net cost, or cost over time?
That the graphs I was just showing were the upfront costs when you get the thing installed, and that did not yet cover operating costs. So that was the cost to get equipment and get it installed.
Yeah, so I'll just, sometimes when we talk about capital costs, that feels jargony to people. Not everyone understands what that means. So let's just break it down into a way that most people understand, which is sticker price. If you go to buy a car at a car dealership, there's a sticker price, right? That's like the price that's on the window of the car that says this car costs, whatever it might be, $10,000, sticker price. So Tom was just telling you about the sticker prices plus any kind of discount you get just to buy the thing off the lot, in the case of the car. So we're about to do a section that gets into, so that's just day one, how much does it cost? We're about to get into a section where we look at the cost to operate the thing. So that would be like your gasoline costs, adding in your gasoline costs. That section is going to come next. But if you understand kind of the idea of a sticker price, that's what that whole section Tom just gave you was just the sticker prices plus any sort of discount.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. Please feel free to move on. And thank you everyone for your patience.
Okay. So now we're going to look at cash flows over time, right? So going back to the car analogy, you bought the car, you financed it. So you're going to pay a car payment over some period of time, and you're also going to pay for the gasoline. So now we're going to kind of use that idea and we're going to apply it to the electrification of a home, right? So it's like, how much did all the appliances cost? We're going to finance them and make those payments over time, maybe over 10 years or 20 years in the case of a solar system. And then, what does it cost to pay for the electricity for that water heater? Well, the electricity for my fully electric home. Okay. So this is that graph that I told you we would come back to. That answers the question, which is cheaper, the gas home or the electric home? And we're going to look at this two ways. This is a snapshot. So this is looking 10 years out. So in 2030, well, I guess that's only 7 years now, but the idea was to look 10 years out from our starting point in the analysis and to say at that 10-year point, what will be the homeowner's annual energy expense? So when they add up all their bills, their gasoline bill, which is the gray, if they stick with a fossil fuel car and a fossil fuel home, what will their gasoline bill be? What will their natural gas bill be at the end of the year, totaling the whole year? What will their electricity bill be? Plus any sort of, I think in this case, actually, we didn't burden them with any kind of loan payment for that. We'll just assume that they had the fossil fuel. So there's no capital expenses. This is just operating expenses in the case of the gas. Now, if you look to that comes to like $5,400, something like that for the fossil fuel home. So if you kind of think about what you pay for gas in a year and what you pay for your natural gas in a year and your electricity bill, it's not too far off, but there is an escalation in prices that's built in here. But this is what we would estimate for that home in 10 years out. Then we said, okay, let's look at the all electric home. And this was very detailed analysis where we looked across, because there's a time of use rate on their electricity, which has assigned a different price for the electricity at different times of day. So we had to make a forecast for when that heat pump water heater would turn on and when the heat pump HVAC would turn on and when they would charge their car. So we made some assumptions, and generally we tried to make, conservative assumptions, meaning like trying to weight the analysis against us, but also being rational, right? Like if someone is going to get a lower price to charge their EV at night, well, they're probably going to do that. So, let's not, let's be reasonable. So we looked at, did this very detailed analysis. And what this shows is that in the electric case, let's look at the second column that says electrified. So this is an electrified home that doesn't have any solar or a battery. You just electrify your appliances. That does include the EV. And we're just looking at the incremental costs here. So what did you pay upfront over and above what the gas appliances would have cost? And it's very little, right? But whatever that very little amount, which is that tiny little yellow sliver at the top, we said you can finance that. And then you make your annual payments. So you're making a very small annual payment because for the most part, all of your electric equipment was cheaper than the gas equivalents upfront. And your electricity now covers your fuel for your car, right? Because it's electric. It covers your heating and your cooling and your water heating and your cooking, et cetera. And it still has all that base load electricity that was present in the gas home, right? Your lights and plugs and stuff. But what you see is this person is paying far, far less for all of the energy they use in their life for driving and for their maintaining their home. Taking another step to the right, you see the electrified home with solar now. This person is paying a loan on their solar system, which brings the total on that to $717 a year. So they're paying more for a loan, but they're paying less for electricity because they're making their own electricity, if that makes sense. And then on the far right, this person wants some backup resilience in case the grid goes down. So they decided to get a battery. Okay, so they have a solar, a battery if the grid goes down. People are worried about that with an electric home. And their home is all electric and they're using their EV. They never have to go to a gas station again. They're basically generating their fuel on their roof. And this person is still paying, it's almost half of what the person with the gas home and the gas car is paying in a year for all of their energy. Even with that loan built in for the solar and the battery system. So the point here is you look at all the costs and the person is better off with the electric home financially. And this is the case where for the person who asked earlier about including the EV, again, we looked at EV prices for similar cars. And what we found was with the federal incentives now, the EV for an equivalent car made by Chevy, at least, the EV is cheaper. So it doesn't, the people who say, well, that's gonna, really throw this analysis off. It doesn't because that gas car is actually more expensive, the sticker price than the EV. Okay, so this is a table just showing the underlying numbers for people who maybe had a hard time or were curious what the actual numbers were in that graph below, but there's no new information here. It's just the data. All right, so I do want to expose like some of the key assumptions we made here for this scenario. And again, this is just for one home. It's for the San Bruno home. We did this for every home in the study. And the results were consistent. So I don't want you to think that like we cherry picked or something, but the results are consistent. All of the homes that are electric are cheaper to own and operate than the gas homes. So we assumed that where they used a loan for the electrification of the equipment, the appliances, that they took advantage of a special loan that PCE is offering or planning to offer soon, which is a 10-year loan at 0% interest rate with a maximum of $10,000. in the case that I just showed you, they would only be financing the difference between the gas equipment and the electric equipment. But in reality, you can use it to finance the full electric equipment. Then for the solar, the loan term we assumed was 20 years at a 5% interest rate. And then if they exceeded the $10,000, which they didn't, in our cases, the $10,000 covering for the loan that was offered by PCE, if they exceeded that, we assumed a market rate loan of 10-year term and 6% interest rate. Okay, so the battery capacity we assumed that they held in reserve, that they had a battery system, was 30%, meaning they actually used the battery to offset some of their electricity in those more expensive evening hours. They actually used the battery, even not just for outages, but they kept 30% in reserve in case there was an outage. We also assume the federal tax credit at 30%, which is what it is today. We assume they had a starting electricity rate of the PG&E time of use D rate. And then once they either purchased the EV or the battery, whichever came first, we assume that they switched over to the PG&E EV2A rate, which has a lower cost than the time of use rate, lower cost during the day when electricity is cheap in California, and higher at night, or sorry, higher in the evening when there's a lot of demand on the grid. We also assumed that the drivers drove about 12,000 miles per year for the whole household, that we assumed these escalation rates for natural gas 6%, for electricity 3.2%, and gasoline 5.4%. These come directly out of a California Public Utility Commission report, which you can see down below, a reference to that. And the equipment conversion years in the scenario that I just showed you, these are very easy to change in our model. But in this case, we assumed that they converted to an EV at the beginning, so year 0. They convert to electric HVAC in year 3, water heater in year 2, cooking in year 5, dryer in year 5, solar at the beginning, and battery in year 2. Okay, so another way to look at this, so in this case, we were looking at a snapshot, right? Just in 10 years out. In this case, each point along this line is a year, so we're looking at 30 years. So if you can imagine 30 of those bar charts. So let's look at the brown line here. The brown line is the mixed fuel home. So that is the home that was going to cost about $5,000 to operate. And you can see out year 10, it's about $5,000. You can see how the price to operate that home, to own and operate that home, just escalate over time. Versus, let's pick the orange line here. That's the fully electrified home. No solar, no battery. The green is electrified plus solar and a battery, and the yellow line here is the electrified home with solar. So you can see that's the cheapest scenario, is you electrify and you have solar, and the costs to operate your home and your car are much, much lower over that 30-year time frame. So, and again, this was consistent. We saw this, there might be some scenarios for homeowners where in the early years, maybe one of these lines is a little bit higher than the brown line, the fossil fuel home, but generally most of these costs projecting out are much lower, and that gap continues to widen as time passes. Okay, I'm assuming there are going to be lots of questions about this one, but let's open it up for clarifying questions. And for big kind of discussion questions, we can probably hold those till the end, which is coming up quickly. So Alera, are there any questions?
Yeah, so there was like a few about the rates. So the first one was, what energy cost escalation rates did you use in your projections? I think you just covered this, but some people were ahead of the curve. Go ahead.
Yeah, hopefully we covered that. And again, that comes directly from the CPUC, from something called the en banc meeting, where it was both the joint between the California Public Utility Commission and the California Energy Commission, where they sort of presented these numbers in, I think it was 2021. So those are the numbers that, those were sort of the best numbers from the most credible source that we could find.
The next question is, sorry if I missed this, but if a home has a 100 amp panel and want to use a load pausing or load sharing smart device, instead of upsizing the panel, what is the typical installed cost of one of these load sharing / pausing smart devices?
Yeah, so the devices we saw range from something like $600 to, I've seen as high as maybe $1,000 for the device. And then the installation can be quite easy if the device just needs to go right next to your panel. So in some cases, you need to run a low voltage wire between a panel and the breaker. Like if the device is actually, the circuit lands in a sub panel, let's see, so the breaker might be far away from the main panel. So it ranges, but generally I would assume maybe around an additional $500, something like that, for the installation of the pauser. Tom, does that sound about right to you?
Yes, it does.
Thank you. And then we have, could you do the same analysis for solar plus with or without batteries, comparing NEM-V version 2 versus the NEM 3? We need to get applications for the solar before April 2023 to be under NEM V2. True. I wonder what the loss of solar credit is in comparison. Could this be done and easily shared with us?
Yeah. So Josie, I could try to answer that if with the
Please.
cash, if you could bring up the cash flow slide. Yeah, so just to check, Josie and I have been working quite a bit on this in the past few hours, past 100 hours. So is what's shown here still the way it was before? Or
yeah, so this is NEM 2, yeah.
All right. Okay, so this represents it under NEM 2, and you can see the solar line is the lowest cost line in nice sunny yellow solar color down there. And that under NEM 2, with the quotes we had, adding a battery and financing the battery actually raised the cost for the homeowner. So that the cost of the loan payments on the battery was more than the battery could save. And now this all changes in NEM 3. So under NEM 3, that yellow line wouldn't be down there, but if you had a battery that was able to pocket all the excess energy production when the solar system was producing more than your appliances were using, the green line would still hold. So that green line, solar with battery, is still accurate under NEM 3 for a battery that can hold the energy from the solar system that you're not currently using. And as you electrify a home and car, you get more opportunities to self-consume your solar and to not have to use a battery, but you self-consume it by charging up your water heater, getting extra hot water in there, or, recovering after morning showers is one thing, or charging your car during the day if your car's at home during the day, that kind of thing going on. But the green line, so it kind of stays. Where naked solar would be under NEM 3 is somewhere above the green line. And then it really gets down to NEM 3 treats solar no longer on an hourly bucket for netting. It treats it on a 5-second bucket for netting out which way you get compensated for your solar. If you self-consume it, you save the full retail rate. If for the part that flows back out to the grid, you get compensated like the rest of the grid generators get compensated at a lower value, typically around, say, 5 cents. And so then there's less benefit to naked solar or to solar sized bigger than current consumption under NEM 3. And then there was people were talking about, oh, I don't want NEM 3. I don't want to be paid like the other generators. I like being paid at retail rates under NEM 2. So in order to secure that, you need to have an executed contract, is my understanding, with a solar company for installation of a solar system. The executed contract you need to have it. I've heard a couple of different dates. I've heard April 13th as the earliest date I've heard. So I'll just use that date. And so you need it by then or before then. And then you have up to, I've heard, 3 years to get the solar system installed and still keep the NEM 2 treatment. Otherwise, you're only going to be fairly compensated like other generators.
All right.
So-
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Go
I
ahead,
was
Jessie.
going to jump in and say, for those of you who don't know what NEM is, NEM stands for Net Energy Metering. And the reason the question came up is because the state of California, net energy metering is sort of the policy that directs utilities and how they compensate homeowners with solar on their roof, how they compensate those customers when, let's say you're not home during the day, your solar's generating a lot of energy and you're not using it. It's like, how much should the utility pay the homeowner for that? So anyway, so that's what NEM, and that policy is changing in this year. And so solar customers used to have really, really, really cheap electricity because they got compensated very highly for that electricity they didn't use. And now the state, when the grid is like flooded with electricity during the day, is the utilities are feeling like, wow, we're paying people a lot for this electricity that no one's using. We have too much electricity during the day. So the policy is changing, and therefore rooftop solar, if you don't consume it, it's going to become less valuable over time. Now, if people change their behaviors, maybe they figure out a way to charge their EV during the day and use that solar, or they figure out how to kind of, put more of their electric loads during the day, then they won't be as affected by this NEM change. But there is a change, and it will affect this analysis, and we did not take it into account, but Tom sort of walked you through what the effect would be. My sense is that in every year, at least on this home, the person would, under NEM 3, the person would still be better off, and for sure in the out years be much, much better off than the person with the fossil fuel home.
Thank you both so much. This would be a really great time to finish our last section before we get to the questions. And thanks for your patience, everyone. And sorry for those whose questions we didn't get to.
Okay, Tom, over to you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. So, in the course of doing all this, we started thinking about what are the problems we're running into, and what are the kinds of policies that create problems and the policies that solve problems. And so some of the ideas we were coming up with for more supportive policies to help us all electrify, because that is absolutely required, that all buildings ultimately electrify in order to be able to economically retire the gas chemical delivery system to buildings. It may still be there to industry and power plants, but it seems like we've got a better alternative than chemical supply to buildings, so we ought to use that electrification. So in order to get there, things we saw that could really help out are figuring out ways to streamline the building permit application process for electrification. And so making it easier, there are things that the city really doesn't actually need to know, that they don't need to know these things ahead of time. They can inspect for them on site at the final completion, and they can make clear what their requirements are for a passing system. How good do we require the installation to be? How big how big do you need to size wires and breakers, et cetera, to do these things? And what plan checking is an extra step in between where everyone draws drawings and checks out, am I doing this right? Am I doing this right? And the building department answers yes or no and what to address. So figuring out how to standardize this and go skipping a step of plan checking would be a great help. Then make incentives available at the point of equipment sale. So it's embedded in the price tag. So there's not paperwork and confusing different Venn diagram of all these different incentives that are out there. And some of them require the equipment be better than this and others require it be better than that. And so you don't know exactly, how is my equipment better enough to get all these things. So right now it feels like there's a tornado of incentives. And then one idea I had based on my radical idea for how to get more compliance on building permits and get more heat pump water heaters in is just mail every home in town a plumbing permit for 120 volt plug in the wall heat pump water heater in their garage. Don't even wait for them to request it. Just give them a permit. So then everyone has a permit now, and they can see the requirements. They can go online and see what are the installation quality requirements. Then they can get it contracted and done, and then get it inspected. So that's a way to increase both uptake and compliance. Then also, we see there's still entities offering all these incentives for gas appliances in some cases. And so end those incentives. Installing gas equipment is always a step backwards and kind of cements emissions for decades. So then extend electrification incentives to be panel friendly and grid friendly devices, not upsizing of panels. There's incentives for upsizing. And I'm thinking, no, that's not the right thing to incent. You want to incent solving the problem, not upsizing the panel. Upsizing the panel is a way you can fit on, but optimizing to fit on the existing panel is a more grid-friendly way to fit on and cheaper, as we were showing earlier in the presentation. Also, expanding the incentives so that they're available to different solutions we find, like inverter-driven heat pumps or CO2 refrigerant heat pumps. And also these kind of circuit sharers or circuit pausers, these panel keeping devices. So don't incent the upsizing, incent the solutions that are alternatives to upsizing. And then we're finding in a lot of cases that these combustion air safety tests are being required when they shouldn't need to be required. Because if you no longer have a combustion device in that building or that room, you don't need a combustion air safety test. And so I think there's some reform needed in those tests, in the rules for when to apply those tests. And also, if you're not changing the pressure in the room, you don't need that test, even if there is a gas device left. So if your heat pump water heater is fully within the garage, it's just circulating garage air through itself. It's not drawing a vacuum on the garage or pressurizing the garage. And so there's no change in combustion air safety, even if there still is a gas furnace in that garage. All right, then no longer allow new strandings of gas appliances for existing buildings. So these are these existing building reach codes that different cities are now trying to put forward. We think those are a great idea. And so right now we've got city infrastructure or city processes allowing people to keep making the same old mistakes, even though we know we can't afford it as a society to keep making those mistakes. So we need to get the courage to have the policy to stop making the mistakes. So require electric as gas appliances fail and are replaced. So require them to go to electric alternatives, and require electric alternatives during remodels, during renovations, tenant improvements, and additions to buildings. And then just straight up prohibit the sale of one-way cooling, which is a one-way heat pump called an air conditioner. Make new permits for cooling to be for two-way heat pumps that can do the cooling that people are asking for, but not require a separate machine that does heating. The same machine can do the heating. And so then policies would be great if people, taking a look at this kind of tornado of incentives, and you've got a little extra budget, don't spend it making one more incentive. Think about, can you spend that money, your budget, to assist things in reducing the friction in the process and training up the workforce? Say offering training and incentives to electricians or installers or plumbers, but maybe just training and all this stuff and helping them transition their businesses. Next. We're also seeing there's need for some kind of system level solutions. And so finding a way to make these electrification plans widely available and easily accessible. And Josie was mentioning that based on some of the things we developed, she and her son have been working on a kind of a web app tool that helps do that. And I've been thinking that it can get as simple as even just an equipment list. These plans don't have to have drawings. And you could just figure out what is an equipment list. It's pretty easy to figure out, of the most efficient solutions for each of the 5 end uses. And you put out that as a possible plan. And that plan has the best chance of fitting anywhere, and it probably leaves the most extra space. And then people could decide, are there anything they want to be more opulent in any of those categories? But that's kind of what I think of as a postcard plan we could send to someone. So there's lots of ways to start looking at how do we make plans available to people, so it's not a bespoke adventure you have to go on like Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, but it's more like, oh no, this is standardized. Just use this list of equipment. You'll be fine. You'll be as close to fine as you can get, and solve the rest of the way if you need to. Anyway, so streamlining the permitting for electrification and training building officials on the relevant code to help them streamline that. And also kind of a shift in focus for agencies and entities towards what I think of as macro safety. So we focus so much on micro safety, and we haven't been looking at macro safety. And for macro safety, we have to decarbonize. And so we have to make achieving projects much easier if we're going to decarbonize and produce more safety. So increase the labor pool and work with community college grads, trained in HVAC, plumbing, electrical, and electrification design. So see about working with the colleges to develop the coursework that'll help train the workforce to go into this. The Luskin School study of what are the needs in the workforce for California said we need 100,000 new entrants into building electrification with jobs that last 20 years. That's the amount of workload required. So that's the workforce needed. A lot of these optimization things Josie and I work on are ways to reduce the hours it takes to electrify a home by using the right equipment and not having to do the extra hours on panel upsizing. That's another way to help solve the workforce problem. So also we encourage the formation of contractor businesses focused on electrification. So see, what can we do to encourage those coming about? And Josie mentioned getting individual trades to start looking at how can they be better stewards of the panel? How can they take on more of the work or leave the next trades in better positions to do the rest of the work on the home? And then entities or even individuals can organize bulk buys of equipment and or services. I just saw in my email thread I think yesterday or today, somebody was saying they wanted to go out and look for a water heater and they wanted to find someone else who's also looking for a heat pump water heater. So together they could save a little bit of contractor time and do some group buddy shopping and get more eyes looking on the bids. So I recommend people start figuring out how to do bulk buys, and cities can help. City of Palo Alto used to do those 40 years ago when I worked there. Then also acquire and store a rotating stock of power efficient equipment so that you don't have a local supply chain problem. So we know what the solutions are. Pre-order them, get them here locally and housed, and maybe it's at a regular distributor, or maybe the agency has to take a position and have a warehouse that they supply it to the distributor, but get the things from wherever they are into the county so that they can get to the job sites. And then launch some direct install program with contractors bidding through an RFP process. That's what's going on in Palo Alto for heat pump water heating. looks like a great idea. And another one is one that Josie has raised. It's kind of starting something similar to Peninsula Clean Energy, which is a joint powers agency or joint powers authority, which is a group of cities teaming up together to have the same authority that they each have as cities, but now in a team. So do that same type of teaming up in a county space or bigger that would focus on electrification and have that authority. Like Peninsula Clean Energy focuses on their portfolio and programs, but you could form another one that was really into the hardware of and boots on the ground of doing electrification. Next. So we've talked a lot about planning, making an electrification plan, which, really is the plan is the decision about which equipment in which sizes to use and where to put it. That's what a plan really is. It doesn't have to have drawings. It can just be written and some pictures, it can be anything, but it's the decision about what to do, how big it is, and where it goes. And these plans will save, we were showing anywhere from $3,000 to $25,000 compared to not having a plan and doing some panel upsizing. Also, the plan really frees up electricians from doing the upsizing work. So they don't have, they don't have to come and upsize the panel and put in a new power mast and a new weather head and a new service line and things like that at your home if you're not upsizing. So, because if we're going to electrify everything, we need to try to make the projects efficient and not make them into make work projects. And also it can save around 6 months of wait time with PG&E if you're waiting to get PG&E's permission to connect at a larger level. Sometimes PG&E needs to do engineering studies and they have fees of about $1,500 to do those engineering studies, and you have to wait for those results. So the plan helps you skip that. And then it frees up the PG&E staff who otherwise are needed, can be upsizing the homes that actually need it, like the ones we found on a 60 amp panel. In order to do the car charging that we all want to drive, sometimes 60 amps just isn't enough for a big Western lifestyle. And so 100 amps that's what Josie and I are finding. It's a lot. It's 24 kilowatts of power. You can live large on 24 kilowatts. It takes a lot more attention on 60 amps, and I don't expect people to focus that much to get it right at 60. Also, the plans help free up PG&E staff who are needed to be working on the pole top transformers. Already in Palo Alto, they ran into that as an interesting constraint. Too many oversized car chargers set in there at 50 amps, all turning on at the same time, were overheating the transformers on the pole tops outside their homes. And so then the utility needs to be able to replace those pole top transformers or work on the feeder lines, which are the wires that feed those transformers, or work on substations. The more kind of watt dieting or panel optimization we do, the less utility staff is needed on make work projects, and the more that can be directed towards we actually need that work because the neighborhood does need more energy. Anyway, so we can avoid the transmission and distribution
to interrupt,
equipment.
Tom,
Right.
but we need to wrap up fairly shortly so that we can have some time for some questions. Thank you.
All right. Well, anyway, these are just some of my thoughts on what we've been seeing on why a plan is needed. We really focused that it's needed and it benefits the homeowner. But here in this slide, I'm showing it also benefits the rest of society by letting us all electrify. And so one quick idea is electrify simply so others may simply electrify. All right. And so that's it. Any questions about the policy ideas? Any clarifying questions about what I was meaning?
So we do have a question here that says, do you have the staying on gas will be costly operating cost over a time graph for medium and high income homes? And if so, can you share?
Right, so that sounds like that would be a cash flow analysis graph for low, medium, and high incomes. So, and showing that that upper line that was curved upward. And so I don't know that we have it offhand, but it sounds, I think it's this, actually, it's going to be the same line, I believe. It's one line for low, medium, and high incomes, and it's that top line we showed in the cash flow graphs that was curving up to the right-hand side.
Yeah, that's the gas one. But I think the question was how the gas versus electric. We don't, that would show up in the case studies graphs because some of the homes were low income, some were medium income, some were high. But I think that is something that wouldn't be too hard to do. That could be an interesting follow-up. But we can't show it today, but yeah.
All right, thank you. May we please move to the next slide? Thank you. So before we move on to questions and comments, we're asking for folks to please help us fill out this survey. I am posting the link in the chat as we speak. It is 4 questions, really looking at who else would this information be good for? What are next steps or your suggestions, and whether you would like to participate in a focused conversation that will look at where we should move from this point forward. And then it'll also look at, or ask you, what information would you like to hear about that wasn't covered today? So I'll give you all a minute or 2 to do that. And then I am going to open up the floor for questions. So if you have questions, please do feel free to raise your hand and I will go ahead and unmute you. We do have a few questions from earlier on today that are outstanding. So while you guys finish the survey, I will start with those. So the first question that I have for you, Tom and Josie, is how can we scale this study so that every resident has the same guidance, support, and contractor qualification list?
A good question. That was kind of that policy thought on one of those last slides with, could there be a joint powers authority that's focused on electrification, maybe, or maybe it could be a service that's offered by Peninsula Clean Energy or Bayron. I don't know. There could be a kind of a government agency that helps with the planning, providing plans. The actual work, could be done by the contractors we have out there. Although my sense is we need a lot more contractors. So unfortunately, that is kind of going in the wrong direction. We're losing contractors as they retire, and young people aren't going into those fields. So I think there's a lot of thought to be given to how do we increase the contractor base, and then as for how electrification plans get done. I think it's a really good discussion. Could be government entities or quasi-governmental entities like PCE who do it, or like it could be something that emerges in the private sector too.
Thank you. Did you have any thoughts, Tom, on this one?
No, but I agree with Josie.
Wonderful. Another outstanding question that we have is, how would you tailor this presentation to homeowners, not the advocates that we are?
Well, we've been doing this for the homeowners one by one about their homes. So, this was all about what the broader findings are. I guess we could focus it down and just eliminate all the policy stuff, but just say, here's what we saw when we looked at 10 homes, and it probably applies to you. And try to figure out how to array the homes so they could find where they are on the array.
Yeah, I think my experience is that homeowners are more interested in kind of the nuts and the bolts. Well, I have this situation, what do you recommend for that? There's a lot of, they're kind of more focused on the beginning of the presentation, and definitely some on the cost, but it's going to be different for every home. So that's a little harder to generalize, but we could give people like, ballpark costs. And as Tom said, in the county study, we have given these presentations to the individual homeowners about their specific home and the specific equipment that we're recommending for them.
I recently got to give a presentation online for a Menlo Park group called Electrification, How It's Getting Easier. And so it was using a lot of what we found here for homeowners so they could see how it's getting easier. And it was about having a plan and about these pieces of equipment that really solve the problem and about the incentives. So maybe, that's one idea for the format, but I wasn't going so much to the 10 home results to show them that. I was taking what I learned from it.
Thank you. I'm just re-putting in the form in the chat. And also the QR code is available. The next question that I have here is, can someone who is somewhat knowledgeable as a homeowner make their own plan for electrification? Or is this a service that is likely to require professional, and who does that?
So a very motivated homeowner, especially if you have a little bit of technical experience, could do this. This tool that I developed, this web tool that I put it in the presentation earlier, it's zerocarbon-home.com. That web tool is kind of geared at this point, at least, more toward someone who might be assisting you in putting together a plan, but eventually it could be something that could be simplified enough such that a homeowner could use it. I think a motivated homeowner with a little bit of training probably could use that tool and do load calculations, for example, on their own. It's a good question. And my suspicion is that over time there will be kind of like electrification advisors or consultants or something like that pop up. I mean, Tom and I do that informally now for people, but I think it probably will become its own kind of profession and maybe get rolled into companies that specialize in electrification services. Kind of like there used to not be solar installation companies. We just had electricians who you could convince to get up on your roof and install solar 20 years ago. I was in the solar industry then, and now we have the whole professional industry who just, specializes in that. I have a feeling this will be similar.
Right. And it's already happening. So I provide assistance to different firms. Some of them are online in this presentation, to Home Energy Analytics, to Quit Carbon, and Emerald Eco. So those firms and maybe others, and Larry Waters. So those firms are already starting those services, and we're already trying to help them. But Josie is developing this tool based on the methods we were using and perfecting. And an idea I'd like to explore with people who may be on the call is if somebody wants to sponsor a homeowner class in how to make your own home electrification plan. And we spend several sessions, a couple hours a week online, and just work it out. Here's how you would make your own, and you get your assignments, what to take pictures of, what to look at, et cetera, and what calculations to do.
Thank you. And kind of just like an add-on to this question, how did you guys get the contractors to work with you? Because there's someone who expressed that, hey, I've reached out to these people already, and I've had trouble having them follow through with help on this. So do you have any insights as to how that person should move forward?
Well, one thing, if you had an electrification plan and then you contact the contractor, for them, they'll see it as an easy sale. You're saying, I know I want this 15 amp water heater, 65 gallon size, put right there. I know what I want. And then what's your bid? Mm-hmm. I've even heard of contractors who are willing to let the customer buy the equipment and the contractor does the connection work. Mm-hmm. So there's different places where people need to figure out where they want to be on the scale from totally passive mm-hmm. to do it all themselves, and then backing off from that, the contractor does all the connection work and that stuff. And who does the procurement of the water heater, who decides the water heater, et cetera. But work your way, as far as you want to work across that scale is how you can take control of it, get it done, and save some money. But a plan and specifying the right equipment really helps.
Thank you. Now I'm going to move on to Robert Whitehair, who's had their hand up for quite a while. So thank you for your patience. I'm now going to unmute you so that you can talk. seems like he has gone. So now I'm going to allow Paul to talk. So please unmute yourself. Paul, if you unmute yourself, you'll be able to ask your question live. Oh, okay. So, okay, Robert's question had to be answered already. All right, well, I'm not hearing anything from Paul. So if you do choose to ask your question, we're still online and happy to answer. But we do have some outstanding questions from earlier on, if Tom and Josie are willing to answer those.
Sure.
Awesome. So so this is about the bulk buys and peer-to-peer self-help. Any recommendations as to where, how to find people embarking on electrification projects so we can exchange info? Is there such a single place, such as a listserv?
Yeah, I can jump in on that one. So I actually started a next door group called Home Electrifiers. And if you want an invitation to it, you can use the email that's up on the screen now and email me and I will send you an invitation. If you live in Menlo Park, you should be able to see it. Maybe Palo Alto too. You should be able to see it when you open next door. But there's about 170 people on that list who are all trying to electrify, and you could find other people who might be interested through that. That's one way. I don't know if anybody else, Tom, you have ideas, or anyone on the call has ideas for that.
No, but I'm glad that the policymakers are hearing that question, because I think there is room for cities, agencies, entities, PCE to seed the formation of groups that do bulk buying or to take on the bulk buy task themselves. But I think, again, I'm into these spectrums, and it can be as simple as having a place where people can pair up to interview contractors together, because more eyes on the contractor helps you think of new questions to ask them about your job to get a better bid, and or do bulk ordering. I noticed when I was looking at heat pump water heaters for sale at Home Depot, they had a nice sale on them, and there were discounts for buying 3 or more. So pairing up is good. And then through talking with contractors, they tell me that they can do the jobs cheaper if there are multiple jobs within a short distance of each other, so that they have fewer truck rolls, especially handling the permit inspection type stuff. So being able to come back once to do all the inspections, but there are cost savings to grouping up. And so the agencies and entities ought to start thinking about that. How might they assist in that happening?
Thank you. Another question we have is, how do contractors get compensated for providing an electrification plan for a home? What is the cost to the homeowner typically?
And I don't know the answer to that one, but there are, there are a few firms on here, although let's see, Home Energy Analytics, their Home Intel program, I believe that's paid for through PG&E. And so it's a free service to their customers, I believe. And then I don't know the business models of too many others on here. Oh, and there's another firm doing something like this called Yellow Tin. And they're doing a little bit of it as well. But anyway, reaching out to those firms and asking them what their services are and do they charge.
Yeah, and to my knowledge, so locally here, Emerald Eco can both kind of help you with the whole home electrification and the contractor work. And then there are other folks who are kind of more involved in kind of the planning parts, and I don't know how involved in working with the contractors. I don't know of any standalone contractor like an electrician or a standalone HVAC contractor who would do a plan yet. You know, we're recommending that they be trained or that be encouraged, but yeah, I think there aren't any standalone plumbers, for example, who would do an electrification plan that I know of. But there are these firms that are emerging that do whole home electrification, and you know, they should do a plan if you're going to do your whole home.
Thank you. Another comment and question is, Tom and Josie, I imagine you're familiar with PCE's conclusion that a difference in operating costs for heat pumps versus gas alternatives is negligible for PG&E customers. Have you looked into why your results are so different?
I haven't looked too hard, but we just updated the rates we're using in the analysis. And so ours are more modern. And I don't know if anyone's got their gas bill recently, but wow, gas prices on the West Coast surged a lot. And so I personally think they will come down. The pendulum will swing a little bit back towards some relief, but the long-term trend, I believe, on gas prices is rising. And so we use the en banc PUC proceedings that showed that expectation and embedded in there the future, which is the future. If we really try to achieve our climate goals, we sell less gas across the gas system, which raises the delivery rate because it cuts the denominator by which you're spreading all your fixed cost across less and less sales. That's algebra. The cost has to rise, or the rate has to rise. Sometimes when an entity takes a look at this, they only tell you about the first year cost. They're comparing the costs for the next 12 months and seeing, oh yeah, they're not, they're not really different. And I kind of agree. On most things, electrification is not a way to get rich. You don't do it to get rich. We're seeing with all the incentives, now all of a sudden you can save a whole lot of expense. But I do also think we're in a time called peak incentives where I don't think they'll get that much bigger than they are now, and they'll come back down. So anyway, I'm not too worried about these costs. I know where we have to go as a society to make a livable future, and I know what we have to do to help people start moving there.
And I'll just add too that if you look at our cash flow slide, actually in year one, which I think is, I think that's what probably is being contemplated when people say the cost to run. So it's an individual device, which we didn't look at operating expenses for individual devices. We didn't do it in our analysis, and we didn't present it here. But if you just looked at it for an individual device, the operating costs today, our graph doesn't, our graph says in the starting years that actually things are somewhat similar, but they diverge the further out you go. So I don't know how many years were contemplated in the analysis that was just, someone was just asking about, but in the close years, the operating costs are more similar for an all electric home versus a fossil fuel home. But there is this diverging in costs as time goes on because the gas rates are expected to escalate faster.
Thank you. And may I ask that we move to the next slide, please?
Yeah.
So thank you, everyone. We're at time. I just put the same link into the chat. This is the link to the Office of Sustainability's website, where you can find information about this study, as well as little flip books with great visual representations of what has taken place in each of the 10 homes. If you have any additional questions, you just saw Tom and Josie's email. My email is also there. I do not have all the answers, but I can hopefully connect you with people who do. And I want to thank everyone for their time today. Thank you especially to Tom and Josie, who spent so much time getting this together for all of us. And just doing something that's so impactful for all of us in this space.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to work on the project. I'm so grateful that the county did that mapping study and figured out the need and then put out the RFP. And Josie was reminding me it was me who talked her into it. And then she's really been the powerhouse in getting all this work done. And so I've been really fortunate to be able to surf this wave along with Josie and the county.
Yeah, it was a team effort, but yeah, kudos to the county and to Kim Springer and to Susan and Alero both, but who I think Kim's original idea, and I think that it was, hopefully moving the field forward a little bit, and we'd love to see other cities, counties, states do this kind of work, and look forward to seeing the next steps that others take. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.